On Monday, February 17th, a Delta Airlines plane overturned and caught fire while landing at Toronto International Airport. Fortunately, all 80 people on board survived. There were 18 injured. 3 of them are in serious conditions. But how can a plane flip over like that? And how is it possible that in a violent dynamic like this there were no victims? In this video, we will see the hypotheses that can explain what happened. But before starting, I would like to make a clarification. In recent months, we have often heard about plane crashes, and this can lead to the mistaken perception that plane crashes are increasing. But that's not the case. The ITA, the International Air Transport Association, states that the number of air accidents and fatalities has been steadily decreasing in recent years, despite the number of flights increasing. Consider that 2023 was the safest year ever, both in terms of the number of accidents, with 1 accident every 1.2 million flights, and in terms of the number of fatalities. For 2024, we currently have partial data, but the statistics are still declining. The airplane, compared to a car, bus, or train, remains statistically the safest means of transport regardless of individual accidents. It was 2:45 p.m. local time when a Bombardier CRJ-900 aircraft, operated by Delta Airlines on behalf of Delta Airlines, flipped over during landing at Toronto Pearson International Airport, Canada. To try to understand the most likely hypothesis on the dynamics of the incident, let's start from a main point. As you can see in the videos, the plane touched down too abruptly, as if it had not braked enough. It was a violent landing, let's say, and the first thing that catches the eye of an expert is that the plane lands too flat, with a very horizontal profile. Let's try to understand why this is a problem. Usually, when landing, just before touching down on the runway, airplanes rise their nose, so to speak. It is a maneuver called flare, which allows the plane to decrease its vertical speed before touching the runway, because by offering its belly to the air, it increases the friction. And this has a braking effect. There are situations in which a flatter landing is preferred when, for example, the runway is slippery. But it seems that this was not the case. It is true. In Toronto, there had been a snowstorm in the previous days. But the meteorological report confirmed that at the time of landing the runway was dry, visibility was good and the winds, with gusts up to 65 kilometers per hour, were intense, but not so much as to prevent a landing. The hypothesis is therefore that the landing without flare was not intentional, but that it was due to causes of force majeure that we will see shortly. Continuing instead with the dynamics of the accident, having not performed the flare maneuver, the plane went crazy. The track at high speed and visibly tilted to the right. It is possible that a less than perfectly symmetrical landing concentrated a good part of the ground impact load on just one of the landing gears. This would have caused the plane to bank, so much so that the tip of the right wing touched the ground, scraping along the ground for about 3 seconds before breaking off. And before the plane flipped over, at this point there are 2 questions. The right wing could have acted as a pivot for the rotation of the plane on itself, or the left area, left alone to face the impact with the air, could have been pushed upwards by the lift. Most likely, the rotation was due to a combination of these factors, which caused the plane to completely flip over on itself. Okay, so there was no flare maneuver and the landing was too abrupt. But what could be the causes? We reiterate that at the moment we do not know, and the investigations will shed light on the exact dynamics. What we can do at the moment are general considerations. The hypothesis that it was a trivial error in maneuvering by the pilots cannot be excluded. But it seems like an unlikely hypothesis, given that these are standard procedures. A concrete possibility is that the pilots had difficulty maneuvering in the last seconds of flight due to sudden gusts of descending wind that could have pushed the plane down too quickly. These are the so-called microbursts, the small-scale version of downbursts. They are currents that form in the presence of thunderclouds or, in any case, with strong vertical development. In these clouds, a delicate balance is created between warmer air currents rising and colder air currents descending. And at some point it can happen that the cold air falls to the ground, all at once and at high speed. And when these currents crash to the ground, They open like a fan, creating small gusts of wind that are horizontal to the ground, i.e. lateral. The microburst seems like a convincing cause. The downdraft part of the currents would have prevented flares maneuver and made the impact violent, while the horizontal gust part could have destabilized the plane until it flipped over. But how is it possible that there were no victims with such a violent crash? What we can observe from the images is that the fuselage, meaning the central body of the plane, perfectly withstood the impact. And this clearly protected the passengers who, fortunately, were correctly following the safety measures, namely the seat belt. To this, we must add that the intervention of the firefighters was practically immediate, since they were on site and prevented the flames from spreading before the evacuation was completed. Part of the credit also goes to the flight attendants, who coordinated and executed the evacuation operations impeccably. As you can see, during these videos in which we explain the dynamics, we always talk about hypotheses. This is because, in the event of a plane crash, the procedure involves the start of an official investigation, in this case coordinated by both the competent Canadian authorities. Why? The plane was built in Canada and the Americans, because the airline is from the United States. The investigations are aimed at confirming the causes and dynamics of the accident, in order to adopt in the future measures to prevent events of this type from happening again. Guys and girls, I, as usual, thank you for following us up to this point, and I will see you in the next video. Always here on Geopop Everyday Science.